Hello chess enthusiasts, my name is Miha and welcome to my chessrealm YouTube channel. So Norway Chess Championship is still underway and I found a very interesting game from the first day. There were only blitz games, a duel between Viswanathan and Magnus Carlsen from the 7th round. Let's see what happened in the game. Viswanathan had white pieces and he started with e4, g6. Now this is very rarely played, so Carlsen surprises with a modern defense. White plays d4, d6, knight to c3, bishop to g7, pretty much standard developing moves. And now white plays bishop to e3 and black responds with a6, preparing this b5 pawn push. Of course, white would have prevented with a4, preventing this b5, but white is not interesting. Instead, h4 was played, threatening to play h5, trying to make black player nervous by advancing with an h pawn, but this is not actually anything that black should worry about, and he does not indeed. So knight to f6 was played, and now white plays f3, protecting this pawn on e4 and also protecting this g4 square, preventing any unpleasant knight to g4 jump. And now black plays b5, white plays queen to d2, double attack on this h6 square, trying to target this bishop on g7, trying to harass black king on the king side. So black plays h5. Now this h6 square is double protected, so white cannot play bishop to h6. And now white continues with knight to h3, offering knight on h3 to a bishop from c8. And black says, okay, let's do it. So bishop from c8 captures knight on h3. So black has given up on a bishop pair in order to gain a developing tempo. Now white has two ways of recapturing, either with the g-pawn or with the rook from h1. Well, of course, if g-pawn captures on h3, it wouldn't have been anything wrong with that, but white doesn't want to get double pawns here along the h5, so rook to h3 was played, and now black continues with knight from b goes to d7, white castles queen side, and now black plays queen goes to c8, further reinforcing this c pawn, preparing this c5 pawn push, and also extracting king on c1. So white wants to get his king out of the queen's radar, so king goes to b1, and now black pushes a pawn on c5, attacking pawn on d4. Of course, capturing on c5 is one of the options, but white could also play a d5, but in this case the position would be partially close, and these pawns on the queen side would be really intimidating, trying to harass the white king. So white simply captures with d pawn on c5. Now black has two ways of recapture, either with the pawn or with a knight. Well, white is already has a queen and the rook on the d file, and he's putting a lot of pressure here on this knight on d7. So black plays knight captures on c5, keeping this d file semi-close, and now white responds with knight goes to d2, preparing to deploy the knight on either d4 or f4 wherever it be necessary. And now black finally castles king side. Of course, h6 square is no longer protected twice, so white immediately grabs the opportunity. Bishop goes to h6, attacking bishop on g7. Of course, black could have captured immediately on h6, but after queen recaptures, well, this is quite unpleasant because white threatens with rook to h3, harassing this king on g8, pinning this pawn on g6, and also later with a knight to f4 there, trying to sacrifice his knight, or sort of tactics can come up. Of course, black has a lot of defensive moves at his disposal, but here we have black would have to play very carefully. So in the game, black doesn't go for the exchange. Instead, a5 was played. So black is marching with his queen side pawns, and now white captures bishop on g7, king recaptures, and now white plays rook to g3, pinning this pawn on g6, who is tied to the defense of his king. And black says it's no danger, so b4 was played, and now white plays knight to d4. And now this is a very tricky situation. Black has to be very careful because white threatens with knight to f5. Let's see, black makes a random move, let's say rook to b8, and white simply plays knight to f5, it's check, and if king goes, let's say, to h7 or h8, then queen simply goes to h6 and going to be mate on g7 on the next move. So here black would only capture this knight on f5 with the queen, therefore losing this is a material because if, for example, king goes to g8, again we have queen to h6 threatening with mate here on g7, knight to e8 protecting this g7 square doesn't help. Then we have knight to e7, it's checkmate. As stated before, here queen to f5, capturing this knight would be actually the only option. Of course, another way of defending this f5 square would simply be to play e6. Now black can capture here on f5 with the e pawn, but then white would simply play knight to b5, double attack on this pawn on d6. Well, let's say rook to d8 doesn't help, knight simply captures, and later with d5 here a knight on d6 is cemented, and white is much better. So in the game, black has decided to give up on his knight pairs. So black plays knight from c5, captures on d4, forking both queen and the rook. So white has no other option but to capture with the f pawn, and now knight from f6 captures on e4, again forking both pieces. Queen goes to e3, knight captures on g3, and now queen captures on g3. So what do we have? White has 2 pieces for rook, but black also has 2 additional pawns, so black has a lot of counterplay at his disposal, especially these pawns in the center of the board. They are really intimidating, and black has decided to play queen to g4, first of all attacking rook on d1 and also threatening to capture queen. So black is offering the trade of queens, hoping that he will be able to exploit his advantages in pawns. So white has decided to keep the queen, so queen goes to e1, keeping the queen, and also all the tactical possibilities that come up with it. So black continues with rook from a goes to c8, taking over this c file, putting some pressure on this pawn on c2. White plays g3, protecting this pawn on g4, and now black plays rook goes to c5. And white continues with bishop to e2, attacking queen on g4, and black responds with queen to e4, pinning this bishop on d2. And white has decided to get his queen out of this pin, so queen goes to e2. And now let's see what black can do. But the best option would probably be rook from f to c8, putting additional pressure on this c2 pawn. Let's see, if rook from f go to c8, this pawn on c2 is 3 times attacked and also 3 times defended. But black threatens with the e5, removing one of the defenders of this pawn on c2. So here white would have to play a very active, probably with the bishop to e3, driving this queen away. Anyway, it would have been a very dynamic situation. Rook to c8, taking over the c file would probably the best option for black. But in the game, black plays rook to e5. So of course black threatens with queen to g2, attacking first of all pawn on g3 and also pinning this bishop on e2, who would actually be twice attacked. So a very unpleasant situation. So white responded with bishop to f3, preventing this bishop to g2, also attacking queen on e4, and black continues with queen to e3, again offering the trade of queens, and again white doesn't go for it, so queen to g2 was played. Still, maybe here the best option is simply rook to c8, again probably would be the best option, but black again had decided to march with his queenside pawn, so a4 was played. And now white plays knight goes to c6. Now let's see, knight is attacking a very important piece, rook on e5, and also this pawn on e7 and pawn on b5. So we have a fork on multiple pieces. But here actually black had a very interesting move at his disposal. a3 could have been played, attacking a pawn on b2. Well, let's see, if white captures rook on e5, then queen simply recaptures, threatening with checkmate here on b2. Now this is a very tricky situation. The correct continuation would be c3, and after black captures, then b3, closing the position, because if for example white would capture pawn on a3, then b pawn simply recaptures, and of course again threatening with a checkmate here on b2. So after let's say if king escapes to c1, we would have queen to b2 check. After king goes to the only square d2, we have rook to c8, threatening with rook to c2 for skewering king, trying to gain the queen. And if white tries to defend this c2 pawn with rook to c1, then black simply captures on a2. Let's see, for a bishop, black has 3 pawns, but once this queen is gone, then a pawn simply advances, and with king in the open, this is simply a winning position for black. In the game, however, Black doesn't find this move. Instead, black plays rook goes to f5, double attack on this bishop on f3, and white defends with rook to d3. Okay, implicitly defends because white attacked the queen and also defends this bishop on f3. And black responds with queen to e1 check. White defends with rook to d1, queen to e3, and rook to d3. And of course, black could have played rook to e1 again, and the rook has been a threefold repetition, so the game would be draw. But black is not interested in that. Queen to c5 was played, avoiding this threefold repetition. So white continues with knight to e7, attacking rook on f5. Rook doesn't have actually a lot of good squares. Actually, the only square is e5, so rook goes to e5, and now this knight is under attack, so knight goes to e5. And black continues, let's say, with the attack, so rook to e1 check. Now white has to defend this somehow. There are two options, either with the rook or with the bishop. Well, both are playable actually. I can go through all the variation, but in the game bishop to d1 was played defending the check, and black continues with rook from f5 goes to e8. Now these rooks are connected and they are very strong on this e file. Black threatens with rook to e2. Let's say white makes a random move, let's say g4, simply rook to e2, and here white can only sacrifice his queen for a rook because bishop cannot capture because it's pinned by the rook on d1. And if, for example, queen goes to, let's say, g3, we have queen to c2 check. Again, bishop cannot capture because it's pinned by the rook. And if after king to a1, queen to c1 checkmate. Now the position, of course, very tricky, but white could have deliver, let's say, some of serious threats. Let's say after queen to f3, threatening with queen to f6 would definitely be one of the options. But in the game, white plays a very bad move. Queen goes to d2, and here black would have won if he would have found the correct continuation. And the correct continuation would have been simply queen to g2, double attack on this bishop on d1. Of course, bishop is twice protected, but let's say if white tries to create some escape set by a3, or maybe even if white would play king to c1, black would simply capture bishop on d1 check. And after queen would recapture on d1, simply rook to e1, skewering this queen on d1. Of course, if a queen captures, queen recaptures. Black has a queen for a rook and a knight. There are some positions where rook and the knight might be enough for a queen, but this is definitely not one of them. This would have been a winning position for black. But okay, it was a blitz game, so it is not easy to devise a winning plan. So black doesn't find this move. Instead, a3 was played, targeting this pawn on b2, and of course now white captured this pawn on b4. Now maybe black would have immediately captured this queen on b4, but black doesn't go for it. Instead, rook from the last rank goes to e4, attacking queen on b4. So white finally trades this queen. So queen captures on c5, d pawn recaptures, and now b pawn captures on a4. So what do we have? White still has two pieces for a rook and additional pawn. So let's say white is better and also has two passed pawns on the queen side. But okay, they are double. So let's say white has effectively one passed pawn here on the queen side. But black has majority of pawns on the king side. This is what black will definitely try to use. So in the game, c4 was played, attacking rook here on d3. Now rook is defending pawn on g3 and also defending a bishop on d3. Well, bishop is more important, so rook goes to d2, and now rook to g1, trying to grab this pawn on g3. Of course, black responds with knight to c3, attacking rook on e4. So rook goes back to e6, and now black continues with a4, rook captures on g3, attacking knight on c3, and now knight goes to b5. So again, let's see what do we have. Black definitely has a drawing chances. Maybe rook to a6, targeting this pawn on a4. Well, let's see, after rook to a6, yeah, white could have responded with c3, protecting this pawn on a4, and this also pawn on c3 is also protected. That's definitely one of the options for black. But black could have also tried with simply with c3, attacking rook on d2, and after, let's say, rook to d3, trying to trade the rooks, black could have tried with rook to e1. Of course, if rook captures on g3, rook captures on d1, and it's going to be checkmate because b2 square is protected. So white would have to find the move knight captures on c3, and of course after rook captures on d3, pawn recaptures, we would have g5 threatening with the g4, advancing with g-pawn, but if h-pawn captures on g5, we have this h4 trying to advance with h-pawn, f5, h3, but here white would have to keep get his king out of this pin from the rook, so after king goes to g2, after h2, white would play bishop to f3, protecting this h1 square, preventing the promotion move h-pawn, but if black tries to drive this bishop away, rook to e3, let's say bishop simply goes to h1, rook to e1, bishop to f3, and the game would have probably ended up in a draw. Okay, so in the game, black finds none of the opportunities. Instead, rook to e4 was played, targeting this pawn on h4, trying to create 3 pass pawns here on the king side, and also threatening with c3, attacking rook on d2, and also trying to grab this pawn on a4. So white plays c3, blocking this pawn on c file, and still here maybe black would try with rook to d3, trying to here trade the rooks. Even if rook would capture, pawn would recapture, and the a pawn would still be in danger. Definitely black still had the drawing chances here, but in the game black captured this pawn on h4, and this was a fatal blunder. Now white simply advances with a pawn, so a5 was played. Now let's see what black can do. Of course black can try to stop this a pawn, but let's see if black would try with rook to e4, then after a6, rook to e7 doesn't help because this a7 square is protected, so after rook to e8, black would simply play knight to c7, attacking this rook, and after also protecting this a8 square, and after rook goes to c8, white would simply play a7. Of course, if rook captures, white simply promotes to queen, and the same pawn is anyway going to be promoted. Even if black tries with advancing on his pawn, let's say if h4 would have been played, then white would simply promote his a pawn to queen. Of course, here black has no other option but to capture queen with a rook, and after that naturally white recaptures with a knight. Advancing with an h-pawn wouldn't exactly help. After let's say h3, white would simply play king to c2. Of course, this h2 square is protected, but after rook to g2, let's say trying to provide some interference, white would simply play bishop to g3, attacking the rook and also protecting this h1 square. Either way, white is 2 pieces up and is winning in this position. Okay, let's go back to our game. So in the game, rook to h1 was played, and after playing this move, black simply resigned, realizing this a pawn is going to be promoted. There's nothing black can do about it without losing decisive material, and realizing that all is lost in this position, Magnus Carlsen resigned the game. So I hope you like this game. I hope you have learned something from it. If you have any questions, my email is below in the description. Of course, I invite you to visit my Instagram page. That's it for now, and see you soon.